Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today we're diving deep into a story that isn't just about another African country, it's a mirror held up to South Africa's face. We're looking at the recent protest crackdowns in Kenya, but more importantly, we're asking a hard and uncomfortable question: are African governments, including our own, slowly turning against their own people? Across the continent, the warning signs are getting louder. Growing youth unemployment, shrinking democratic space, heavy-handed policing, and a widening gap between the elites and the masses. And when people rise to speak out, the response is increasingly violent. We've seen it in Nigeria, in Uganda, in Zimbabwe, and now, we are seeing it in Kenya. But let's be clear. This is not just a Kenyan story. This is also a South African story. What's happening over there could very well happen here, or depending on how you see it, it's already happening. Let's unpack the events in Kenya and then connect the dots to our own political climate in South Africa. In 2023 and 2024, Kenya experienced some of the most intense anti-government protests it's seen in years. Led by opposition figures like Raila Odinga and fueled by deep dissatisfaction with President William Ruto's economic policies, thousands of Kenyans took to the streets. Their demands were basic: lower the cost of living, scrap oppressive tax laws, and stop the looting of public funds. But the Kenyan state responded with brute force. Security forces cracked down hard, firing live ammunition into crowds, conducting nighttime raids, abducting activists, and even, in some reported cases, carrying out extrajudicial killings. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International have accused the Kenyan government of using the police as a weapon of intimidation and suppression, rather than protection. At the center of the protests was a dire economic situation. Kenya's public debt had ballooned to unsustainable levels, and in a bid to raise more revenue, the government passed a finance bill that introduced painful new taxes on fuel, food, and digital transactions. The poorest were hit the hardest, just like here in South Africa, where VAT increases, petrol hikes, and electricity tariff spikes squeezed the life out of working-class families. But what made Kenya's case more alarming was the political tone. Ruto's administration labeled protesters as criminals, suggested that dissent was foreign-funded, and pushed a narrative that all who opposed the government were part of a destabilization plot. This is textbook authoritarian language. We've heard it before, from dictators and strongmen across the continent. When governments start seeing peaceful protest as a threat rather than a right, that's when democracy begins to die. Now let's bring this home. In South Africa, protest is a way of life. From shack dwellers in Khayelitsha demanding housing, to university students fighting for access to education under #FeesMustFall, to recent service delivery protests in places like Tembisa and Hammanskraal, ordinary people are constantly forced to raise their voices in the streets because the ballot alone hasn't delivered results. And yet, what is the state's response? More often than not, it's violence. In 2012, we saw the massacre at Marikana where police gunned down 34 mine workers demanding a living wage. In 2021, during the July unrest, more than 300 people died as security forces and vigilantes took matters into their own hands. In 2023 and 2024, countless protests ended in rubber bullets, tear gas, and arrests. The state has increasingly relied on police and military presence, not dialogue, to deal with dissent. Just like in Kenya, our political leaders often resort to fearmongering instead of accountability. Protests are labeled as anarchic, anti-development, or sponsored by enemies of the state. Government ministers appear on national TV and speak about third forces behind every uprising, as if the lived experiences of poverty, inequality, and corruption aren't enough reason to protest. And let's not ignore the broader regional trend. Across Africa, we are witnessing what some analysts have called the securitization of governance. That means states are turning to militarize policing, surveillance, and emergency powers to control society, instead of democratic consensus. From Nigeria's SARS brutality to Uganda's crackdown on opposition supporters, to Sudan's military regime, and now Kenya's suppression of economic protests, there's a clear pattern forming. But here's what makes the South African situation uniquely dangerous. We do have a relatively open democratic space, at least on paper. Our constitution guarantees freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and freedom from arbitrary detention. But increasingly, these rights are being eroded not through legislation, but through everyday violence and neglect. When the police shoot rubber bullets at protesting school kids. When municipalities refuse to engage with angry residents. When whistleblowers are assassinated without justice. That's the slow death of democracy. Not with a bang, but with a shrug. Kenya shows us what happens when governments stop listening. When they rely on the barrel of a gun to silence their critics. And South Africa is not immune to that future. In fact, we may already be walking down that road. The police budget is rising. The intelligence services are being quietly revived. And the ANC government, facing declining electoral support, may see heavy-handed law enforcement as its last line of control. What's even more worrying is how state violence is becoming normalized. The media reports it like background noise. The public shrugs. Protesters are criminalized. And the very institutions meant to protect human rights, the police watchdog, the public protector, Parliament itself, are either captured, underfunded, or simply ignored. So, what do? We raise awareness. We stay alert. We speak out when our rights are threatened, not just when it affects us personally, but when it happens to anyone. We hold leaders accountable not just during elections, but every day. And we draw strength from our shared struggles, across provinces, across class, across borders. The Kenyan people are still fighting. They are demanding accountability. They are refusing to be silenced. And so must we. It's not enough to say, at least we're not as bad as Kenya, or things could be worse. That kind of thinking is how oppression gets a free pass. Instead, we must say, we've seen what's possible when governments turn against the people. We will not let it happen here. So let Kenya be a warning, but also a spark. A reminder that democracy is not something we inherit once, it's something we must defend constantly. And in an Africa where repression is on the rise, the struggle for dignity, justice, and accountability is more urgent than ever. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Do you think South Africa is heading down the same path as Kenya? Or do you believe our democracy is strong enough to withstand these pressures? We want to hear your thoughts. See you next time.